Our worship service today is focused on the concept of hope. Hope as an alternative to optimism. Hope as a balance against pessimism and despair. Hope was an extremely important part of what our Universalist ancestors were all about. They were a religious community directly opposed to the Calvinist views of many of their Protestant contemporaries. Calvinists were not known for their hopeful message. Your fate was sealed. Only a few were saved and were destined to spend eternity in heaven. The Universalists claimed, on the other hand, that all souls were destined to spend eternity in heaven. The name Universalism was derived from the belief in the Universalist salvation of all souls. Oh, if you were truly evil, you were to be punished in some way, but not for eternity. They spent a lot of time trying to figure out just how long that time would be and where your soul would be during this punishment. But mostly, they expressed a faith based on hope, courage, and the love of God. Give them hope, not hell, was their rallying cry. I've always been drawn to the Universalist side of our faith community. My Irish Catholic upbringing was not overtly hopeful. It's much more honest to state that we Irish generally plan for the absolutely worst possible outcome to occur. And if somehow we're lucky enough to avoid the worst, well, praise be to God. But be ready, because the next time we're not going to be so lucky. The history of the Irish may have a lot to do with why we are this way. Catholics at least had the concept of purgatory to turn to. Purgatory was a place where souls went that were sinful, but not sinful enough to warrant eternity in hell, but not quite clean enough yet for heaven. Your soul would wait there, and good Catholics here on earth spent a lot of time offering up prayers and rosaries and life's little hardships that they had endured. They'd offer up for the poor souls in purgatory, knowing they could help speed their soul's journey on to heaven. We also knew that all of the souls in purgatory eventually would be united with God. But we were also told that the lost souls in hell would spend eternity there. To be honest, I never really believed in hell, or the devil for that matter. I remember arguing my opposition to these dogmatic beliefs with the priest, the nuns, the brothers, and the bishop when they would come to my parents' house for dinner. My parents would cringe when I would start a theological debate. They constantly asked me not to engage in these discussions. And I told them, Mom and Dad, I'd be happy to stop if they, the priest, the nuns, the brothers, and the bishop, would refrain from bringing up the topics in the first place. I clearly was a Unitarian Universalist in my heart. I had just not found my way there yet. Growing up gay in this environment presented many challenges. I had developed great survival skills. I knew what topics to avoid, and homosexuality was easy to avoid because for most of my childhood, I never heard the topic or even the word mentioned. I knew I was different, but I knew not to point that out to my family or my classmates. I played dumb when I needed to, and I knew never risk letting anyone else find out. At least anyone who I didn't already know was probably gay too. It wasn't until the summer of 1979 that I had to deal directly with homosexuality and my family. My older brother Joe came out that summer in a very combative way. He had just graduated from high school and he was hitting the club scene with youthful zest and abandonment. My parents were at a loss on how to respond to this, and when they told Joe that he would have to leave our home so as to not let the other kids find out, and there were 9 of us, he says to them, "Don't worry, they already know." Well, they stormed into our living room, they turned off the TV, and they started ranting and raving to us about First of all, how we could have not told them about Joe. And secondly, did we think homosexuality was an acceptable lifestyle? Well, I weathered that storm as best as I could. I never stopped being Joe's advocate to my parents. I reminded them that he was their son and that they had to love him no matter what. I don't think they heard me, but I always hoped that eventually some of it would sink in. Joe had very little to do with the family after that summer. When he met David, his partner, he said he would not come home unless David could come home with him. My parents said David was not welcomed, and Joe never came home again to visit or even call. College was exciting too. I was not at a Catholic university. People who shared many of my views on life and death surrounded me, and I started having relations with other men. And I was going to a gay men's group that met at the local Unitarian Universalist church near campus. It was a wonderful time of growth and celebration, but it was difficult as well. I was outed viciously in my senior year. I had my property damaged and my life threatened. I would go to the showers in the dorm, and when I come out, I'd find my toiletry case had been tossed and smashed around the bathroom. I would come back to my room, and before we had cell phones and text messages and all those things, we had boards on our door that we could write and wipe off messages. And on those boards, I would find incredibly hateful notes written on my message board. I would enter my room, and I would see the photos that I had hung on my walls were torn down and teared apart. It was clear that my roommate was the ringleader of all this. Later, I found out that he was having a gay affair with a friend of mine. This seems to be an all too familiar occurrence. My family was not able to be there because they did not know, or at least we did not talk about, my sexual orientation. Many of my friends were supporting me for the wrong reasons. Leave him alone. He's not a fag, they would say in my defense. And I would tell them, whether I'm gay or not is not an issue we need to be arguing about. We need to remember that discrimination and hate are wrong, no matter what my orientation. And I don't know if they heard me either, but I always hoped. AIDS came into the picture around this time, and I had to really think what would happen if I was infected. I remember staying up at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering and worrying about whether my family would kick me out into the street if I ever became infected with AIDS. I was extremely frightened. I started to watch my friends die, and I waited for my turn because, again, my Irish roots were preparing me for the worst. The most life-changing day for me was June 20th, 1987. I met my life partner, my soulmate, my lover, my husband. I used to never know what term to use, but finally, Colorado and the rest of the United States came around, and a year and a couple months ago, we actually legally married. So now there's no question. I call him husband, happily. But here was the person I knew I'd spend the rest of my life with. The only problem was he was from Colorado and a theater major to boot. He didn't fit into any of the criteria that I had in my mind for what makes good husband material. But I was in love, and I moved to Greeley, Colorado to be with him while he finished his last year of university studies. It was a great time, and the possibilities seemed endless. After graduation, we moved back east because the economy in Colorado at that time was in shambles. Fortunately, we found jobs, a place to live, and my family accepted Glenn as part of the family. But we had an arrangement similar to the fortunately former military policy of don't ask, don't tell. I reconnected with my brother Joe and his partner David, who were living in a city about an hour away. One weekend while they were visiting, I noticed how tired David seemed to be and how much sleep he seemed to need. I knew it was AIDS. And I asked my brother about it, and he confirmed my worst fears. David had AIDS, and Joe was HIV positive. Joe made me promise not to tell anyone in the family, and I honored his request. Eventually, David died, and Joe did contact my family and told them about his status. And I became the official family liaison to Joe throughout his illness. I won't burden you with the details of Joe's decline in health. I'll simply state that Glenn and I ended up taking a very parental role, both emotionally and financially, towards him. Around this time, I found my way to a local Unitarian Universalist congregation, the First Universalist Church of Syracuse, now called the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Syracuse. I had no idea how much I had missed the type of community that one finds in a faith community. As a humanist, I needed a creedless church. But as a person, I needed the loving embrace of the UU community. I was home. I started studying the history of our movement, and that emphasis on hope that the Universalists expressed spoke to my heart. Glenn supported my newfound need for religion, but chose not to join it with me. But when I finally joined First Unitarian here in Denver, he really fell in love with them and became a UU with me, and is very active, and is now the administrator of that congregation. We eventually decided to move back to Colorado. My brother had been at death's door and back again so many times that we didn't know when he would die. We put off the move as long as we could, but we had to get on with life. Joe was in a facility that took care of him. I told my family I would no longer be able to be their connection with Joe anymore. I let my parents know in no uncertain terms that he would die very soon and without family if they did not visit him. I pulled out all the Catholic guilt I could to get them to visit him. Joe would not see me when I went to say goodbye. I guess he felt I was abandoning him. I didn't do so in my heart, but I could understand why he might have that emotional response. I never saw him again alive, and since he refused all my phone calls, I never spoke to him either. But the good news was that several weeks before his death, my parents did go see him. And they spent, I haven't done this in a while. And they spent every day in the hospital with him before he died. I had only been a member of the First Universalist Church of Denver with the wonderful Reverend Stephen Papa for a few months before his death. But the love and care that was given to me by both my new congregation in Denver and my former congregation in Syracuse was amazing. February 15, 1996 is another day etched in my brain for the rest of my life. I was unexpectedly diagnosed with AIDS. You see, Glenn had been tested because of a dental mishap, and his results were negative. So I had to be okay too. At least that's what we told each other. When my doctor walked in the room with my results, he didn't have to say a word. I was dying. He said that my immune system was so depleted that I had full-blown AIDS as opposed to simply being HIV positive. And I was devastated. Somehow I drove myself home because I went there thinking, everything's fine. I don't need to have someone take me home. But I called Glenn from the doctor's office, and he rushed home to be with me. And I completely fell apart emotionally. I didn't want to get out of bed, I couldn't eat for several days, and I lost 10 pounds. Glenn knew that I was not long for this world if I did not start reconnecting to it. I was preparing to die. I had seen many of my friends go before me, as well as my own brother, so I certainly knew what to expect. I'm a person who thrives in community, and Glenn knew this. So he would encourage me to go take a shower. He would assure me that I could go back to bed afterwards, but honey, please, go take a shower. Then I come out of the shower and I find a pair of sweats on the bed. And he said, you know what? You could put those sweats on. You still could go back to bed, but you could do so in those sweats. Then he reminded me, you know, the dog had not been for a walk in many days. And the fresh air would be good for the dog. You know, we could just go around the block once. And then he suggested one more block and one more step. And I was on my way back to life. Glenn became my rock and the first Universalist, a safe harbor. My next blood test showed even worse results, and I was immediately put on an insane drug regimen that I could neither tolerate nor manage. I spent several years in a cycle of going on and off my meds, many times secretly, and I kept slipping into bouts of depression. Fortunately, about a year and a half ago, I switched doctors to a member of my congregation who is a primary care physician for people with AIDS. And she got me on the 1 pill a day. And so for the last year and a half, I don't miss one dose. And I am way better physically and mentally than I was then. So I thank her very much for offering to be my doctor. As the members of my congregation became aware of my illness, letters and cards started arriving in the mail. Big envelopes arrived also, with photocopies of articles on AIDS, new treatment options, the diets to improve my immune system, as well as all kinds of holistic treatment options. What else do you expect from UUs? To be honest, I never got around to reading most of what was given to me. People would make me fattening dishes in the hopes of putting some weight on. They were constantly looking out for my well-being. Their love and concern was genuine. It was appreciated, and I needed it all. I know a lot of prayers were said on my behalf, and a lot of positive energies were being sent my way, and I welcomed both equally. I had to stop working, which had an emotional toll in and of itself. I eventually let most of my family and friends know. Sadly, my parents are not included in that list, and they've left this life never knowing of my status. But it was with my family, with Glenn, and my church family that I was able to hold on to the will to live and eventually start planning for the future. The disease never completely took hope away from me. It was that Universalist emphasis on hope that drew me back again. I became vice moderator and then moderator of First Universalist, which is a term the Universalists use for president of the board. They wanted to let me know that my life still had purpose and meaning. And I received so much love and support and protection and care from the Unitarian Universalist community that I started becoming involved in our movement at the district and national level. Oh, there was a time when I was first diagnosed that I briefly had fleeting thoughts of grabbing my rosary beads and heading to the nearest Catholic church. Maybe St. Jude, the patron saint of hopeless cases, would help me. But then I remembered that I was never and will never be a hopeless case. My Unitarian Universalist faith will not permit me to be without hope. I'm a person of hope. I'm a UU. I will remain a UU, for it's where I belong. It's within the UU community that I feel safe. It's within the UU community I continue to fight the good fight. I continue to find purpose and meaning in my life, and I continue to make a difference both locally and globally. Unitarian Universalist continues to be a source of strength for me, as well as a religious community which affirms the worth and dignity of a gay man living with AIDS. I invite you to be people of hope. I invite you to remember and cherish our Universalist heritage of courage, hope, and the love of God, however that is understood or expressed or not expressed by you. Albert Q. Perry wrote in an article titled Rural Reflections in the 1986 Church of the Larger Fellowship Bulletin, and I quote, "I have planted a hope in my human heart. All that I can touch and see and say reminds me of my mortal limitations and cosmic insignificance. Every pain and pang tells me that I have but temporary possession of the dust that today is mine and me. I may die tomorrow. Surely I shall not survive 100 years. But my hope is larger than my limitations and braver than my body. Through my hope, I escape the remorseless march of time and the lack of meaning in material existence. Hopes do not die, and the hoping heart is the stuff of eternity." End quote. So I shared the details of my life in the hopes that you will better understand the final part of my message today. How easy it is for us to put people, especially people whose lives and experiences are radically different than our own, into boxes. Clearly numbered and marked boxes that define them for us. When I came out of the closet, I started noticing that other people wanted to put me in one of these boxes. If I was gay, then I must think in certain ways. I must be more creative and artistic than others. I must be vivacious and gregarious. I must throw incredibly wonderful parties. My house must be decorated exquisitely. I probably have poodle derivatives of some kind, and a little flair and fun on how I dress periodically. Okay, so certain stereotypes apply. Or they'd say, "It's so extraordinary that you and Glenn have been together for over 28 years. Or even worse, "We were the perfect gay couple, the shining example for all other gay couples." Well, who wants that kind of responsibility? During my term as moderator at First Universalist, I was always aware of members of my congregation who thought of me as the gay moderator. Some were proud that their progressive 650-member church, where I was the only openly gay man, had such a wonderful openly gay man in a public leadership role. Others were waiting for my gay agenda to surface during my term. In actuality, I probably self-policed myself in this area, and I did very little around gay issues while I was moderator. But I remember thinking to myself, you know what, if I was a straight married guy with a couple of kids, nobody would have accused me of having a parental agenda if I made improving the RE program or integrating the children more into life of the church during my term as moderator as a goal. You see, somebody created a box for me, and I jumped right in. It's my challenge to you not to create a box for your new minister if they happen to be of a different category than you have been used to. If they turn out to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, if they turn out to be a person of color, if they turn out to be a person with some visible or acknowledged disability, I want you to understand that your search committee that's looking for your new minister, their goal is to find you the best possible minister to meet the unique needs and dreams of this congregation. It may turn out that the candidate they present to you to consider is from one of these categories. And the word consider is something that goes on when you're actually in a call process. You, as you understand, are in a hiring process. So they're not going to come back and ask your permission. They're going to lovingly say, "Here's what we found and we're excited about it." But down the road, at some point, as your church matures and you get to the point where you do want to call a minister, which is a much more intimate relationship than a hiring position, you will be asked at some point to meet with a candidate and explore that candidate together and then vote. And it's only if the congregation votes, and most times most ministers want 98% yes or better, or they're not coming. So, and you know how hard sometimes it is to get UUs to get to 98%. So at some point that will be the experience of this congregation. And when that happens, I want you to see beyond a category and see the ministry and the vision that this person is bringing to you. And I want you to understand the exciting time that you're having right now. And during that time, I want you to remember our Universalist forebearers and their focus on hope. And I invite you to be a community of hope during this transitional time. Thank you.